Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Craig Cordell. For a living, I am the Executive Director at New Visions Incorporated. We do housing and support services for adults with chronic mental illness. But more importantly, I am here as a member of the Racial Reconciliation Group. I started going to racial reconciliation meetings way back in 2016, and that is when I met Dr. Linda Thomas-Worthy, and she asked me to moderate this discussion today. So thank you, Linda. We are very fortunate to have in our community three top-notch institutions of higher education. And we're grateful that the presidents of those universities and colleges have agreed to give us a little bit of their time this afternoon. I think we are running about 10 minutes behind. I think I could use all that time reading their biographies. Their biographies are included in the programs. I encourage you to look at them. They are all very accomplished men who have done some good work in their careers. I would introduce them to you. The first person on my screen is Dr. Achampong, Dr. Francis Achampong from Penn State Mont Alto. He's been there 8 years, I believe. And then next I see Dr. Wesley Fugate from Wilson College, and Dr. Patterson from Shippensburg University. I don't see, so I know how busy these gentlemen are. So I imagine I think the field of education right now is probably as challenging as any field when you're dealing with young people and a COVID crisis, and then whatever social issues come to the fore. We are scheduled to end at 1:15, and I want to check with both of you if you are able to stay past 1:15, since we are running a little behind. Terrific, thank you very much. Our dialogue today is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our local colleges and universities. I could probably talk to both of these gentlemen all day about that issue. But like I said, we are short on time. So I want to use this time the best way possible. It feels to me a little bit like in terms of race relations and racial justice, our culture has regressed, frankly, to where it was when I was a child. And I think that makes diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism education more important than ever. So I would like to hear from each of you about what you are doing at your institution to advance DEI and anti-racism. And then second, sort of working from the assumption that you've given DEI maybe more thought than a lot of us here have, what is your advice to those of us who do not live on a college campus, what we can do in terms of anti-racism? Dr. Achampong, I would start with you.
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you about this important topic. I appreciate that. And as you said, I mean, we've made great progress in our country on issues of race, but we still have a long way to go, as events from time to time remind us. And here at Penn State Mont Alto and at Penn State in general, we've made a very strong commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion. Penn State's a huge organization, as you can imagine. There are about 60 units or so now that all have strategic plans and all have incorporated into their plans some aspect of DEI, as well as the overall university. So we have things like a value statement that makes very clear what our commitment here is. So our values include respecting and honoring the dignity of every person, and fostering a diverse, inclusive, and safe community. Our strategic plan also has an entire goal. One of our 4 goals is devoted to advancing a culture of DEI. And we have a number of objectives, and we've assigned responsibilities to different people who are going to be measured by certain metrics to make sure that we are accomplishing the goals that we have set. So hopefully, as this conversation progresses, I can share more. We're doing a lot in the classroom, for example. Every student, as a general education requirement, has to take a US course that deals with a culture different from theirs. And then they also have to take a course that deals with an international culture. We have first-year seminar courses that address issues of DEI. And then we have an initiative that we started a couple of years ago called the Race Equity in Action initiative, which Barnes & Noble actually funded initially. And under this initiative, we do a number of things. So we bring authors of books, Black authors of books, who visit classes, and we had to do it virtually because of COVID. So we brought several authors. When we were able to bring authors onto campus, we brought some onto campus, like Shara McCallum, who has a book called No Ruined Stone. Out of the classroom, we do a lot of things. We have a campus symposium series where we discuss topical issues. So for example, we've discussed issues such as whether the Confederate flag is heritage or hate, and we model civil discourse. We've talked about different perspectives on Thanksgiving and meaningful conversations about race and identity. We do workshops. We actually brought Marvin Worthy in to do 3 workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this spring, we're actually going to be focusing on anti-Asian and Pacific Islander discrimination that increased during the pandemic. And then we have all these student activities that are fun things to do, but they're educational in nature too. So for example, we brought a gentleman called Michael Fosberg, who has a book called Incognito, An American Odyssey of Race and Self-Discovery, and very engaging, funny, but also very compelling. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We're doing a lot of other things, and I'm sure I'll be able to share some of them. So I think you mentioned how do others make an impact in this space? Well, I think it begins with a genuine commitment. So when we, in our strategic planning process, which was very inclusive, faculty, staff, we had the student government representative on it, members of the community. So when we come up with a goal that deals with advancing a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not just the chancellor saying that that's what we're going to do. We've made a collective commitment to do that. So I think what needs to happen is organizations, through a grassroots process within the organizations, need to come to the consensus that this is something that's important. There is a business case for it. I mean, research shows that teams that are diverse are more innovative, they're more creative because they bring more ideas and different perspectives to the table. And employers are looking for those kinds of people who are creative and who can lead diverse teams. So it's important for the organizations in this community to recognize it isn't just about social justice. There is a compelling business case, and it is in their best interest in terms of their organizations to advance in this space and to make a commitment in this space.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times whenever people talk about diversity on boards of directors and so on, they feel like I hear from a lot of my white colleagues is that why is someone's ethnic or racial background qualification for being here? And I think it's great that there's some focus there on the value that brings to a business.
Right.
No, go ahead, sorry.
So Craig, if I might quickly say, so the race or ethnicity is not their qualification for being there. So what we're saying is their race or ethnicity should not be a disqualification for being there. So when people are highly qualified, but they're overlooked because of their race and ethnicity, that is what DEI is trying to address. It's not trying to get people who are not qualified to be brought in just because of their race and ethnicity. I think that's a great misconception that always seems to be out there that we need to dispel right away.
And of these, I'm impressed with the number of things and the number of options that are available on campus. How would you estimate what percentage of the student body sort of participates in those sorts of activities? Is that something the majority of students get engaged with?
So Wes, I don't want to hog everything, but the USNIL requirement, it's a general education requirement. every student has to have a US course, which is the abbreviation for a United States culture different from your own. And every student has to have an IL, which is the designation for an international course. And the university, after the social unrest with George Floyd, actually established a presidential commission on racism, bias, and community safety. And they're actually looking at making DEI a curriculum requirement beyond the US and the IL. So that's something that's still in progress. But I'm sure Wes has something to share too. So,
Sure, yeah. I've been told that we should take our full 30 minutes, and so we're not going to stop at 1:15. We'll continue past that. Dr. Fugate, what do you have?
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be engaged in this conversation again. I'll remind folks who didn't get to hear me talk last year, this is my third of these, and my very first public event as president of Wilson College was attending MLK Day in 2020, what seems like eons ago. So it's great to be back and engaged in this conversation. The good thing about being a new president is you get to kind of work with your community to hear what they're passionate about, and even put your own values forward. And I selected Wilson College as where I wanted to continue my career because of its commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. Of course, having been founded 153 years ago as a place to give women educational opportunities when they didn't have it otherwise. And so immediately our community went about work upon my arrival to form a strategic plan. And as part of that, we formed the President's Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And some really wonderful things are coming out of that effort. I think about last year, our theme for the year was Honor, Wisdom, and Justice, which was the theme of my inauguration. And we were able to incorporate that theme into each of our first year seminars. So the very first thing that you learn about when you arrive on our campus are about these important values, and how not only how other cultures experience the world, but how you can make a difference in changing the experiences that people who don't look like you, who don't love like you, who think differently than you might experience the world. Our faculty have done a fantastic job of making sure, as Francis mentioned, with their general education requirements, similarly, that our students are exposed to different parts of the curriculum that make them think differently about how people live in the world today. And I think that's some of the most important work that we can be engaged in. A lot of students will arrive at a college or university doorstep not really having been exposed in the ways that they should be to these critical issues. And it's our job as educators to expose them, to engage them in critical conversations. They can form their own opinions from that, but our job is to give them the opportunity to engage in those conversations. One of the things I'm most proud of is that Wilson had not yet made the step of forming an Office of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we have been able to do that. And we've hired Dr. Erica Johnson to come onto our team and lead those efforts. And why is that so important? Because we need more people on our campus who look like our students, so that our students can aspire to be like them, to find comfort in conversations with people who look like them. And that is really important work that we must continue to do at Wilson. We have a lot more work to do in that arena. And that work can be enhanced by the work of groups like Racial Reconciliation. One of the most challenging parts of recruiting diverse faculty and staff to our community is that they can feel comfortable in the surrounding area in which they will call home. And so there have been members of Racial Reconciliation who have helped us as we recruit faculty and staff. And so that's why we at Wilson have been pouring resources into supporting organizations like Racial Reconciliation to make sure that we are contributing to the conversation of making our community as safe and welcoming for all people as we possibly can. And to your question about how can others get involved in this work, well, certainly your presence here today is very important, and continuing efforts like those with Racial Reconciliation. But I want to add another point, which is poignant for me, having just lived through some of the work of the Borough Council and what they're going through right now as they consider a non-discrimination ordinance, or I guess repeal of the non-discrimination ordinance. We cannot depend on the marginalized communities to lead this work. It is exhausting for them, and there are moments where they need to retreat because it is such difficult work. And so people who are in the majority communities must stand up in these times, because those who live it daily are exhausted. And every time they stand up, they may be putting their family at risk, their employer at risk. And certainly I feel like I've lived that over the last several weeks. And so I encourage those who don't look like or love like or sound like those of us in the majority. You need to stand up and be the beacon in our community that we need you to be.
Yeah, I think that is so important for all of us to hear, all of us white folks particularly. And I've heard it a couple times today, and I think definitely appreciate that. In both of on your institute, I guess one thing I think I called Dr. Achampong president of Penn State Mont Alto, and the title is Chancellor. And so I just wanted to clarify that. And also I got a message that Dr. Patterson had a family emergency, and that is why he's not able to be with us here today. Another question that I would have that may fill the rest of our time: what do you see as direct barriers to diversity, equity, and inclusion on your campuses?
Right. So let me share some of the things that we discovered, for example, from a community survey that we did. So periodically we administer a community survey university-wide, trying to get a sense of the pulse of DEI in the university. So the last time we did it was 2020. And when the results came in, it was really interesting, and we kind of paid attention to what people were saying. So one of the things that came across, 6% of the respondents said they didn't feel welcome in the surrounding community, and 4% said they didn't feel safe. Also, 8% said they had been discriminated against on campus. So what did we do? So in terms of the sense that people didn't feel safe in the community or didn't feel welcome, I invited the mayors of our surrounding communities and township supervisors to come and meet with me. And most of them were able to come. I need to invite the new mayor of Chambersburg because this was last semester when I did that. And there was one mayor who had a conflict and wasn't able to come, but I was able to meet with several mayors and township supervisors to talk about just, strengthening town-gown relations. So that was a very productive conversation. So we made commitments to each other to be involved, to be engaged with each other. So we had students, for example, who volunteered for the Hoops for Harmony event, and students who've been volunteering for Ice Fest, to help people who need help up the slide. And we've decided that we want the community to be engaged with us on campus. So there are cultural events that we have, there are sporting events that we have, and I said to the mayors, I would love for you and members of your community to be here. So that's one of the things we're going to do. And another thing we're going to do is focus groups to gauge the sense of belonging that we have among different groups, whether it's the LGBTQ community, people of color, people with disabilities, so we can address issues, that surface. And in terms of barriers, you talked about barriers. I think one of the barriers that we have here at Mont Alto is our rural location. We've lost some very good talent to more diverse places. I've had a really talented person go instead to Northeastern, to Boston, or to, the University of Hartford, in Bloomfield, Connecticut. So that's a big barrier for us. Another barrier that we have been honest enough to acknowledge on our campus is that our search committees are not diverse and they tend to replicate themselves. So one of the things we decided to do was to, because Penn State is huge and there are 24 campuses, in our strategic plan, we have asked every search hiring manager who puts together a search committee to make sure that there is somebody from an underrepresented group on that committee, even if it means inviting somebody from another campus, because we can do that. I have people from other campuses serve on my committees all the time. So that's one of the things that we have decided to do. Financial need is a huge barrier when it comes to students. Disproportionately affects students from underrepresented groups. So, offering forms of financial aid in terms of awards. So we have multiple awards that we have to try to address that barrier, whether it's a Chancellor's Award or something that we call a Discover Award that we award to students who come from a state that borders Pennsylvania. And we have various kinds of endowments on campus. We have scholarship endowments. And so we award students scholarships out of those. So we try to reduce unmet need in order to help alleviate that barrier. But believe it or not, food insecurity sometimes can be an issue. So we actually do have a Lions Pantry. Of course, it has to have something to do with the Lions. So we have a Lions Pantry on campus, which is actually endowed. So we have an endowed fund that actually, helps stock the Lions Pantry. And then we also realized that quite apart from financial need in terms of tuition and fees, students sometimes just encounter hardship. It could be just a car broke down and it's a commuter student and it's going to stop them from coming to classes for a while. So we established a Hardship Fund, and it's also endowed, and we can assist a student with up to $500, to remove that barrier if it does come up. So those are some of the barriers that we've recognized. If I might mention one more in connection with hiring, recruiting faculty and staff, we also noticed that search committees sometimes forget that they're search committees, and they kind of act like they're hiring committees, and they make certain recommendations that really kind of force the hand of the hiring manager. So you might have 4 finalists, for example, that come to campus, and a search committee might say to the hiring manager, 2 of them are acceptable and 2 of them are not. So the hiring manager has to pick between one of the 2. So in our strategic plan, what we've done is to take that prerogative away from the committee and put it back in the hands of the hiring manager by saying the committee, instead of indicating which finalist is acceptable and which is not, ought to simply provide the pros and cons of each finalist to the hiring manager and let the hiring manager make that decision. So that's a change, if you will, is a structural change from the way that we've normally operated. And it's meant to remove a barrier that we've noticed, that search committees tend to replicate themselves and tend to make recommendations that favor their preferences as opposed to what the hiring manager is really looking for in terms of the hiring charge. And I think I'll stop there and let Wes chime in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about committees replicating themselves. And I think I saw that happen. I attended in Chambersburg, the meeting of town council, the reorganization meeting, and the new representatives selected people they knew to fill out the committees of the borough. And so it's all more white guys. Dr. Fugate.
Yeah, if we were in a church service, I would say amen to all of the above. I mean, so much of that is very familiar to me and things that I would have had on my list. I want to add one, I think, societal barrier that Francis didn't mention, and that is the politicization of this issue. Many of you may know, I have worked in politics on both sides of the aisle at the very highest of levels. I worked for a Republican president at one point. This is not a Republican or Democratic issue. This is a human issue. And we somehow, and I blame both sides about this, have got to find a way to the middle to literally talk to each other and hear one another, to listen to each other. Time and time again, we are finding ourselves on the polar extremes. And we have got to figure out a way to bring ourselves together as a country, as local communities, and enter into conversation, genuine conversation with each other. We actually have more in common than we are making ourselves appear to be. And we have got to find a way to be with each other, understand each other as people, and figure out ways to help advance all people. And I really do think that there are people on both sides of the aisle who think as I do. And as I say now, I've worked for both parties. I am the party of Wilson now, and I am for whatever is good for Wilson and her students. And this issue is important for Wilson and her students.
So may I add something that,
Sure.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a zero-sum game. Some people see it as a zero-sum game. If somebody gains something, then I lose something. But it is about maximizing the potential of everybody in our communities. So if we're not doing that, and we're marginalizing talent just because of a complexion of the person in which the talent resides, we're actually shortchanging ourselves. So when we draw attention to the fact that we need to use all of our resources, all of our human resources, it's not a matter of taking something from someone. It's a matter of maximizing our potential as a nation, as a community, as a county, as a township, as a campus, by making sure we're utilizing all of our talents, giving everybody an opportunity to contribute to the common good. And so that's really what DEI is all about. It's not about taking something from somebody to hand to somebody else, which unfortunately is how some people view it.
Dr. Fugate, you said that this isn't, it has become politicized, and it's a human issue. It's not a political issue. And we have to find ways to come together. Have you had opportunities, successes at doing that on your campus?
Yeah, I would say yes. It's not as far as I would like for it to go. And I will say that I don't think the pandemic has helped us, because trying to do this work on screens is very different. I'm a touchy-feely kind of guy. I come a little bit from a student development background. So I would rather be in the room so we can see each other, face to face and eye to eye. But I will tell you, one really powerful experience that we have had with our students is allowing our Black students to have a session where they just speak about what life is like on Wilson's campus and what life is like in Chambersburg and Franklin County. And there are moments in those conversations that I celebrate, but there are also some really painful moments. And it's important for faculty and staff, all the way up to our board of trustees, a few of which are on the call today, and I thank them for being here, down to the students that they sit in the classroom with that don't look like them, to hear those stories so that they can enter into dialogue with one another about how to make the situation better. And it's really important, and they always want me to speak at the very beginning of these things, and I always say, no, this isn't my opportunity to speak. This is the opportunity for students and faculty and staff who don't look like me to have the floor. And so we have to sit there, as hard as it may be, to hear some of what's being said, as defensive as some people may want to get about what is being said, to really hear the story and the pain, and figure out a path forward together.
Thank you very much. And thank you both for your time. I think watching the clock here, we should probably wrap it up. really appreciate you giving your time to us here today. And I would give you an opportunity to say a few closing remarks if that's something that you want.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting us and for having us come and share some thoughts with you. Maybe I'll just say in parting that as you know, all of our audience, everybody goes back to their organizations, and as they think about this space, buy-in is so important. And so, you know, when we were articulating diversity, equity, and inclusion goal, it was a very comprehensive process. It wasn't just the strategic planning committee. We engaged the campus, and I think it is a tribute to the campus that is one of our 4 goals. When you think about the fact that I'm the only person of color on the strategic planning committee, then that tells you that you know, as an extensive committee, they bought into you know, this important idea. So I think buy-in is extremely important.
And I would conclude by saying, again, thank you for the opportunity to be engaged in this dialogue. And it's always good to be anywhere with Francis, even if it's in a virtual circumstance. But to remember to find ways to fill your bucket during this work. And I say that because it is draining, it is hard, it is not easy. If you can find ways to help others fill their bucket or fill your own bucket, to replenish and nourish the soul, that's really important, because we will not always have victories. In fact, we may have victories and move back a few steps. And we have to find ways to make sure that we can continue to help advance the cause.
Thank you very much. I think events like this help refill my bucket. And I think we've had a number of conversations, small group, large group, where people are sharing experiences they've had, challenges they've had. And I think that sort of mutual conversation, mutual engagement is healthy and beneficial to all of us. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it, gentlemen. I'll turn it back to you, Kim.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to bring Aaron back on to introduce our next